Okay, Kathy's in there.
Hmm?
Kathy's there.
I don't know what to do.
Oh, it's catching up. There it goes. Okay. Hi, Kathy.
Why is it all blurry? What are you doing?
Okay. Hi, Tammy. Okay, so it looks like everyone's finding the link I sent out. For some reason, YouTube changed the way they run their live stream. And I had to send out a new link to everyone. So I'm really sorry about the technical issues this morning. We did fix the glitch, though. And we'll get started on our critique right away. Welcome, Diane and Tammy. I'm glad you guys are all here. Okay, so you guys can hear me okay, right? Just type yes in the chat box if you can hear me just fine. There seems to be a little bit of a delay in the stream. Okay, so looks like we're on track. I'm so sorry. A little crazy this morning. Okay, so hopefully everyone else gets, it looks like more people are joining again. Tammy, no, this is for Group A. Group B will start at 2:30. And you can tune in again at 2:30, and I'll between the first session and the second session, I'll make sure that there isn't a unique link. So the way YouTube used to run the live streams is the same link every week. People could visit that and it would take you straight to the live stream. But it looks like they might have changed that. I need to investigate a little bit. And I might have to send everyone a new link each week, which is a little bit of a pain, but I apologize. We did fix the glitch that was happening, but then there was an issue with getting back online with you guys. So I just emailed everyone a link, so hopefully people are seeing that and going to join in as we get started. So, all right, so Kathy, so let's go ahead and get started with your critique. I know you had questions about the highlight on the left side of the face near the mouth and how to handle it when you move into the painting. And I assume you're talking about this section here. And one of the things that I always suggest is to just slowly bring it up into brightness. One of the reasons it feels so bright is because it's next to one of the darkest shadows that you have. So things tend to look brighter if it's like a small speck that's surrounded by a lot of dark. And the reverse is true if you think about like this dark mole here. It's going to look really dark because it's surrounded by so much light. And so it's really a matter of relative lightness and darkness. And what I would recommend is that you start a little bit more conservative in terms of how bright you actually place it. If we isolated that value, in fact, let me do that. I'm going to just take black. Or how about a middle gray? Let's go middle gray. And we just kind of isolated that value there. This is just for visual. You can see now that it's surrounded by this gray, that it's actually not that bright compared to the light mass, especially if you compare it to like an area over here. I would say it's probably more of a mid-tone. about there. So whenever you're dealing with isolated values surrounded by dark, or a dark value surrounded by light, it's really helpful to try to isolate it and compare it to other parts of the face. So I would just say start off with it as more of like a middle value, and then you can always build up the brightness as you develop the painting. And then the pupils. You said that the pupils in the eye, they're a little large, and can they be made smaller? Absolutely. And I can tell because her eyes are quite dark. One of the ways you can enhance that is just when you paint her eyes, it looks like they're kind of a brown color. I would just paint them a little bit lighter in the reflected light area, which would be right here. And that will help you define more of the pupil, and you can shrink it just a little bit more. Of course, I'm painting that in gray, and you would do that in brown, but that shouldn't be too hard. Just remember that towards the top of the pupil, up in this area where it meets the lash line, especially on dark eyes, and usually right next to the highlight too, it usually gets darker. So you're going to get this gradient that goes from kind of light, and it gets darker as it moves in that upward direction towards the highlight. And the reason is, on the eyeball, the highlight here, the light's coming in. Let me grab black again. So the light's coming in and it's hitting that highlight point here, and then it goes through the lens and illuminates the opposite side of the iris. So that's why you get a little bit of that illumination. Okay, so now I have a quick question, because I know from my view of the live stream, is the screen really pixelated for you guys? Because on mine it is, but I am also streaming from my computer, so it's hard to see what it looks like for you guys. Is the visual okay? Yeah, it's clear? Okay. So I'm just making sure, because I don't want, the image should be pretty clear for you guys. And if you're having trouble, it's pixelated for you, you might try, oh, it is, okay. You might try refreshing the page. So what about for you, Kathy? Can you see okay? Or is this really pixelated? You refreshed and it's good. Okay, guys, so if your image is really, really pixelated, you might try refreshing your page. Just hit the refresh button so that it reloads the page, and it should be good for you. Kathy did that. So if you can't really see well what I'm doing, try refreshing. It could just be a little bit of a lag in the stream. I might end up switching stream platforms from YouTube in the future. I might try and find one that works a little better for what we're doing the next time around. Okay, so did that answer your questions, Kathy? You're having the same issue, Tammy? It could be, hold on, let me try refreshing my view. Okay, so yeah, let's get into your edit. I'm refreshing the page for my view too. Okay, it did clear up for me. So yeah, Kate, the stream will lag a little bit because I'm trying to stream in high resolution. I want to make sure you guys can see really clearly what I'm doing. So there is going to be a little bit of a lag between you hearing me talk and you guys being able to respond. Unfortunately, with the live stream, if you lower the quality, you can have more of a immediate interaction, but the image quality isn't as good. And since these are recorded for people to watch later, I really want you to be able to see the lines that I'm drawing. So Kathy, let's go ahead and get into your corrections there. So when I was looking at your drawing, I'm going to zoom in here. There were just a few minor things that I saw. And first, actually, let me just show you what this looks like. So I did a quick overlay of the picture with your drawing, and you're pretty much like nailed every proportion. There's a few minor changes, as you can see, and I've outlined those here. So this eyebrow is fine here on the right. Let me get onto this layer here. So this eyebrow here is just fine. There were a few things that I was going to suggest in the eyes, and you have this line in here just where it needs to be, but I noticed that she has kind of a heavy eyeliner on, and so what I would suggest is actually just giving yourself a little bit of an indicator line of that thickness. And then I did notice over here on the left eye that this could open up a little bit. You have your line kind of cutting in across in here, and I feel like her eyes have a very almond shape, and so they're going to open up a little bit more here. So the white lines that you're seeing are the areas that I think either need to be added or corrected. So anything that doesn't have a white line, just for everyone's reference, is just fine. So there were a few minor things I noticed in like the jawline here. You had this swooping kind of scoop shape, and it kind of over accentuated her chin. I would just smooth that out here a little bit. It's, again, very minor. Her chin dropped down just a little bit more. It's not as square as you have it on the end. So I would round that out just a tad. And then with the ear, the major one was that this ear was a little high. So you're going to drop that ear to about here. And then it does need to come out to the right just a tiny bit. With regards to the nose, the only reason I added this line here was so that you could see it in the shadow shape. It's part of this cast shadow from the nose, and I don't know if you just forgot to put it in or, but if it's a mid-tone, you don't need to outline it, but if it's a real strong cast shadow shape or an obvious shadow like what you have here, then you will want to indicate it with a line for the transfer. And similarly, because there's a shadow edge along this edge of the nose, you'll want to make sure you indicate that as well. When it came down to the lip, there was just a little bit more of a fullness to the left side of her lip. I'll remove this so you can kind of see what you had there. You have a little bit more of a scoop, and hers has just a little more fullness, and I think this point can be brought in just a slight amount, and that'll give a little more symmetry to her mouth. And then I think the only other part was the area in here with the tear duct. Here, let me scoot that over. So you can see when I remove the line, you have your tear duct in this lower section, and it could be a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit higher, because this part of the eye is a little more closed. But that is pretty much it. I think actually this opens up a little bit more in there as well. Did I forget to bring up anything? Check the width of the ear here. The jawline is a little bit wider there. And the eyebrow is just a little more lifted on the left side here. It's pretty minor, but all of these things will kind of add up and help you lock in her likeness. It's a really beautiful drawing already, and you do already have her general likeness, but if you really want to tighten things up, then those would be my suggestions. Did you catch all that, Kathy? Do you have any follow-up questions? All right, great. Perfect. Yeah, if you have any, oh, and also because this week you guys are getting a new video. It's already up so you guys can watch the next stage of the demonstration. It is a transfer video, so on how to transfer your drawing to the panel and begin your underpainting. So those of you who are getting critiques today, you will want to make the corrections first before you do the transfer. And if you want to run it by me one more time, just post it in the forum and ask me if, if I see anything that pops out, and if not, if you're pretty happy with your drawing, you can just move forward. But if you have any questions or you want me to take a second look at your drawing before you move on into the underpainting, then just post it in the community forum and I will keep a close eye on that and get back to you as soon as possible. Yeah, beautiful job, Kathy, and great model, by the way. She's really interesting. I think it's going to make a great painting. You took this photo yourself, right? And also just a quick reminder for those of you who are tuning in a little bit later. We had a little technical difficulty earlier, but oh, you didn't take the photo. But it's a beautiful photo. And so I just wanted to give, I know some of you guys have asked about working from your own photographs, and this is a great example of the type of photograph that would make a nice painting. You want a nice, strong directional light. You want clear shadow shapes and light shapes, and you want a nice kind of balance of color. So when I'm shooting photographs for painting, these are the things I look for. And it doesn't mean you have to have really, really dark shadows every time, but you definitely want to have a side directional light. It can be Rembrandt lighting, or it can be, I'll do a post a little bit later on. I have a great reference for different types of portrait lighting. Just for those of you who are interested, I'll post that to maybe the community forum for everyone to take a look at. But when you're setting up for painting, paintings are different than photographs. You want to avoid flash photography and things like that because it tends to flatten things out, and it's going to make it hard for you as a painter to make it feel more three-dimensional. So those are just a few pointers. And those of you, again, who are tuning in a little bit later, if the image is looking a little bit blurry for the stream, you might try refreshing your page, refreshing the web page. Okay, so Suzanne, you are up next. And are you in here, Suzanne? Just type in the chat box. It's to the right of the video if you are in here. There might be a little bit of a delay between me speaking and or responding to you, but you guys are welcome to ask questions as I'm working on your drawing. Okay, so you did a beautiful job. You have a nice, strong likeness of the model already. So there were just a few tweaks that I found. And first I'm going to just bring this photo up. All right. Okay, so there really weren't that many points where I felt that needed to change. It was actually mostly here in this left eye. The eye is positioned a little bit high and it needs to drop down. So I'm going to show you what that looks like here. And one of the things I like to do sometimes, if you see as I fade between the two, you can see how the eye drops in the drawing. It's a little bit high. So that's one of my suggestions would be to bring that eye down a little bit and just make sure that that brow also goes down just a tiny bit. Another minor thing that I saw was here in the nostril. It's a little bit narrow where you have it positioned. So I would suggest moving that out to the right. So her nose is just a little skinny. You have it kind of ending right here. So you want to push that. That is kind of where the edge of the nostril is going to be, the opening of the nostril, and the wing of the nostril is going to be out here. So just move, but leave everything else in the nose where it's positioned. And then my final remark would be that this line kind of cuts in too soon, and it makes her jaw feel asymmetrical from the turn in the jaw here. So you're going to want to drop that down to about here. I know it's hard to see because in the photo reference this is all in shadow, but you will want to just bring that down. And why that's significant is when we go in with the underpainting, you will see how I left this area as like a reflected light. So there's a little bit of light bouncing into here, and there's a darker mass behind it. And it's a very soft edge, but it is defined, and it will help give this, again, this symmetry to the jawline. All right, so those are my suggestions, and if you have any follow-up questions, if you're watching this later, just post them in the community forum with a picture of your updated drawing before you move into the transfer. All right, beautiful job. I know not everybody could attend live, so if you are here, just chat, message me in the chat box. So Angela, you are up. Angela, are you in here? All right, so I'm going to, now some of you provided me photos with your drawing with the grid still on, which is great because I could use the grid photo to kind of help me get a nice alignment. If you didn't, that's okay. So here are some of the suggestions that I have. One of the main ones that I saw, here, let's bring the photo in here. It had to do more with the left eye. And it had to do with the height and opening of the eye. So I think the eyes might have gotten a little bit large in terms of height. So you have your line down here. Now the top of the eye is fine. So anywhere where you see the white line is where the corrections that I suggest that you make are. So like you can see, you have your line for the rim of the eyelid here. And as a result of making the eyes a little bit large, you've made the pupils and the irises a little large as well. Which, when you do that, it just makes someone look younger because children, their eyes are in a larger proportion to their face. Tammy, I'm not sure if Angela's here with us live, but she should be able to read your comment. That would be funny if you guys know each other. You should chat in the forum and see if you guys can connect. Okay, so where was I? Okay, so the other suggestion I have is watching the width of the hair. Now this is something that I had to go in and adjust in my drawing, and it's very easy to kind of over accentuate the widths in the top of the head, especially when you have a foreshortened portrait, because you know everything's kind of tilting back this way ever so subtly, so there is a little bit of distortion there and foreshortening. So I would just bring this in a little bit narrower just in this top section. Everything else was just on the money. So that would be my suggestion with the head, and that's going to help get that sense of foreshortening as things kind of angle back for the head. And likewise, the rounding of the jawline. So the more level you are with your model, more eye level, you're going to have a more maybe square jawline. And she already has a little bit more of a rounded jawline to begin with. But because there is this tilt back and we're seeing this underplane here to the jawline, it actually really rounds out over here. So this was just a little bit too narrow. This is where you had your line. So I would open that up a little bit wider, and then make sure you follow that cast shadow line a little bit lower. It dips a little bit below the eye before it curves over that cheekbone. And the reason that cast shadow is important is it gives us a sense of the contour of the forms. And so you get this rounding here, which mimics the rounding that we see on this side. So both cast shadows and form shadows their shape is really important because it can give us a very clear sense of what that form is that the cast shadow is laying on, or that the form shadow is rolling across. So going over into the right eye, the brow could raise a little bit. It's part of her expression. Now, typically we would have, this angled relationship between the features, but she has an expression in her eye. She's looking up this way, and a natural tendency for us when we're looking up is to raise our brow a little bit. And so she's doing that just on this right brow. And so I would bring that up a little bit higher. It will also help open up the space. Now where you have it starting is just fine. It's just that arc needs to be a little bit higher and thicker. And then it will actually give you a little more room because you need to raise just this section of the eyelid. And those of you who aren't in the critique group, but you're just kind of tagging along, these are all common things. You'll probably see me do the same kind of corrections with a lot of different students. So make sure you go through your drawing and check some of those areas. There are even common mistakes that I make in my drawing. So yeah, you can see here how you could raise that upper lid just a little bit here. And then the lower lid, as a result, same thing, because we're moving up the left eyelid, we want to move up the right and shrink her iris and pupil just a little bit. And even though this is in the shadow, there is a little bit of the white of the eye before the corner. And if you need to lighten your photo reference to be able to see that, then do that just for the drawing stage. And then you can darken it again for the painting. With the nose, it's important to use plumb lines. Even though the grid is very helpful, sometimes secondary lines can be really useful to just see how, the position of the nose lines up. So if I were to draw a straight line here and look at how that nose aligns with the tear duct of the eye and the eyebrow, it can help you get the correct width. So your nose is positioned somewhere in here with your nostril here, and it needs to move over to the left. And the same thing here. It's easy to drop this cast shadow, but you want to watch your spacing. And often what happens when we're drawing is we might have made one element too big, and then when we go down to position the mouth, we drop the mouth because we made this too low, and we could sense this distance between the shadow and the lip. But all of those things kind of add up to, errors. So you can see that your mouth is just a little bit low. Actually, where you have this positioned is really, really close. So where you have the bottom lip positioned on the bottom, the little cast shadow underneath, is really, really, really close. But what mainly needs to move up is that opening to the mouth here. It's almost lined up in the center of where you had placed your upper lip. So when you go through, I would always make the corrections to the eye and the outer forms first, and then go in and correct the nose and the mouth because they relate to the eye directly. And then the same thing goes for the mouth. You can always, if you're having trouble placing the corners of the mouth, you can always drop vertical lines on your photo reference and see where on the eye it intersects. Same thing on this side. And when you have like a slight 3/4 view, or she's slightly turned this direction, you're going to have this alignment be a little bit different. And let me just bring up the photo reference a little stronger. Yeah, you might have, you can see when I kind of switch, if you look at the tear duct, the very corner of it should be about here. So let's see where that's falling on your drawing. Yeah, so it's a little bit long. You have your line kind of coming back over here, so you want to make sure you shorten that just a little bit. I'll make that in white so that you can see that. So after the live stream, I do send everyone a screenshot of your drawing with the corrections overlaid, so that way you can use it as a guide when you're correcting your drawing, and you don't have to just come back to the live video and rewatch, although you will be able to do that as well. And my final suggestion is here, this cast shadow shape, or form shadow shape, just needs to open up a little bit. I think when I was looking at yours, where I sensed you were placing it was just into that, into like here, which this is if when you isolate that that value, this value, you can see there's like a little bit of an opacity to it, and this here is our shadow value. There's a distinct difference. So really, when you're drawing your form shadow lines, I always suggest that you stay just inside this edge. And the reason is we don't want to have this strong outline come through in our painting. It will strike through the paint as your painting dries, especially because we're using lead white. So it's always a good idea to have it just inside of that core shadow, or right through that darkest core shadow line before you have the reflected light. And that goes for everyone. So if you feel like your shadow might have been maybe hovering on the outside, nudge it over just a little bit more into that core shadow. You want to hug that core shadow really close. Okay. I think that was everything. So those are my suggestions for the corrections. You do already have a pretty strong likeness, but I think what's going to help lock it in is that mouth and nose primarily, but also tweaking the eyes, just shrinking the eyes in height a little bit. They're a little bit wide. And that should do it. Okay, so if you have any follow-up questions, you can message me in the forum, or you can reach out to me by email, but the emails tend to get buried, so it's easier if you reach out to me through the forum, because I check that on a daily basis. All right, nice job, Angela. All right, Susan, I know you said you probably wouldn't be able to attend live, so you have a really beautiful, clean drawing. Let me pull this up. There were just a few minor things that I saw. You wanted to tweak her likeness. So I remember you had mentioned that you felt like her likeness wasn't quite there. And sometimes, you know, certain models will be a little bit harder to capture if their features are a little bit maybe more generic, or they don't have a really strong character, like a characteristic nose, or you know, something that makes them very distinct. So, and sometimes they can just end up looking like kind of like a generic pretty face, which is fine. But I'd say with her, something that's really distinct are her eyes and her eyebrows, and also maybe some of the expression in the lips. So those are where the characteristics I would, you know, kind of focus on. Now, I didn't see anything in terms of your placement for your shadows. Everything else looks great. Maybe you could go a little bit more narrow on the hair here, but that's being really picky. I don't think it's so much that it made the head feel too wide at the top. The main thing that I saw was here in the eyes. So let's go into that a little bit. So here at the top on the left eye, I see just a little bit more height in right in here. Again, it could be just a matter of the thickness of your pencil. And, you know, when it comes to these things, you know, you can only get so specific without just plain tracing. So, so these are just suggestions if you're wanting to kind of tweak it a little bit. And then with the iris, I feel like maybe what happened is the bottom of the eye got a little pinched, so you have it up here. So I would just soften that roll as that comes in, and then it'll give you a little more room to drop this iris a little bit more open and lower. On this right eye, I think it was the same thing here, just open, instead of closing this off so quickly, open it up just a little bit. I think this area was on the money, so it's just right here that you have that separation. Your tear duct might be a little short on this eye. I think it opens up a little bit more, which will give you a little more space across the width here, which will allow you to bring the eye over to the left a little bit. I think your line is like here and here, so you'll want to nudge that over this way a little bit. And then same thing, this got pinched off a little bit too quickly. Just slowly kind of slope that back. This area is a little hard to read in the photo. As you can see, we see a little bit of the light rim right in here, but then suddenly this kind of drops up, that shelf comes up, and we see more of her lash line. So it's kind of like a ribbon. There is that flat surface up there, but our perspective's not letting us see it. So when I draw that, I'm going to draw it a little bit larger. What I like to do is just imagine it like a ribbon or a shelf, like that. And then you have the underside shelf to the eye. And sometimes you'll have that happen in there too. Maybe you can't see it as it comes towards the top. So sometimes lightening your photo reference will help you see that a little more clearly, just for the drawing purpose. And it really depends on the scale that you're drawing. If you're drawing a decent size, then you will want to include that inner shelf. But if you're drawing a very small portrait, you're just going to drive yourself crazy trying to get those underplanes, indicated. In the scale that we're drawing, if this is close to the scale that I suggested, 11 by 14 or larger, then you're definitely going to have space for that, and it's going to make a difference in your painting and how realistic the eyes feel. Because we do see that under shelf and lower, the upper shelf and lower shelf. With the nose, her nostril on the right side is just a hair wider. And then with the mouth, I think this is where you had the corner placed, and I think the opening of the mouth too just drops a little bit more on this left side here. So bring that down, and then this could extend a little bit longer and wider, and that's going to kind of give us that, there's this kind of perspective that's happening, as the mouth curves. And it's important to remember that we're not just drawing lips. Underneath the lips, there is these planar structures going back into the skull, right? They're the teeth. And so what that does is it pushes out this plane here. You kind of have to imagine this kind of like a sphere, and you have this form wrapping like this. So even though we also have this sideways tilt between the corners of the mouth, there's also that perspective of the lips wrapping around the skull and the teeth. So that will make a big difference in that structural feeling. And then last but not least, but there's just this little roundness to her lower jaw that will just help to, again, accentuate that foreshortening and rounding of this underplane that we see. Those were my only suggestions. They're pretty minor, but I think it will help you achieve that likeness that you're wanting in the portrait. All right, so and if you have any questions, follow-up questions, Susan, just post them in the forum, and that goes for everyone. If you guys update your drawings and you want me to take a second look, then go ahead and post them there. All right, Beth, are you in here, Beth? All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you're here, just say hi in the chat box. And yeah, you have a really nice start here in your drawing. I'm going to just pull the photo up a little bit. So you can see here just by looking at the picture, your drawing is really on the spot with position of the features, which is great. You don't have any major proportional alignment issues or anything like that. You seem to have a good sense of the perspective on the head. The areas that I see that need a little bit of adjusting, they're pretty minor. Here on the left side of the head, again, it's easy to make these areas too full. Your line is kind of out here. So just narrow this top section of the head on both the right and the left side, and it's going to help give that forced perspective of us being below the vantage point of the model. We're almost like eye level with her neck or her chin. You know, we might even be just a little bit lower because we can see this underplane. So there is going to be this narrowing of the top of the head as it rolls back. And similarly, there's going to be a narrowing of the forehead. So if I show you here, and part of that is the cast shadow from the hair too. So maybe that just needs to come in a little bit more. So as you can see that transition. With the eyes, the lines on your drawing are a little soft, so it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly where, but I do feel like maybe this can be brought up a little bit. And I think with the eyes, it was that they felt a little pointed. And so my suggestion would be just to round out a little bit on the top and bottom and make sure it's not as angular or sharp, because her eyes are very rounded, and that will help capture her likeness. Same goes for this left eye here. This part needs to come up and close off, but then this can open up and round down a little bit. Oops. And so you can see that difference there. Right here you have it just a little bit too open towards that inner tear duct. And don't forget to include the form shadow right on the side of the temple. This arc here, kind of side plane on the head, goes back in this direction. So you usually find a shadow plane or a transition plane there. And then this is going to be a little bit of a cast shadow from the eye socket and the eyeball connecting over to this. And sometimes it's a lighter shadow because there's light bouncing in from the cheek here, but it's still considered part of the shadow mass. And then here in the nose, just watch the shape of that shadow. She has a very distinct kind of cut in here. There's this V shape to her nose. You can see it there. But if I take away the lines, you can definitely see that zigzag. So just make sure you have that. Your position of the nose was fine. It was just that shadow. Okay, and then here in the neck, it just needs to be a little bit more narrow. And it's not by very much. Where you have it starting is just fine. It's just where it ends needs to come over to the right just a little bit. All right, so those are my suggestions, and really nice job. I look forward to seeing your painting started. All right, Susan? Are you here, Susan? I know some people had schedule conflicts, so they weren't able to make it live. Yeah, you have a really nice start to your drawing. Let's bring up the photo here. So as you can see, your shadow shapes are on the mark. There's a little bit of a change here in the lips that I suggested, and you can see here on the left side of the jaw. So let's bring up those lines. So my biggest suggestion would be to definitely bring this out. Again, it has to do with getting this proportional kind of rounding of the jaw, so that we get that upward perspective and we get that feeling that we're looking at her underside. The lips are a little off center from the nose. So if we look at where you have this kind of dip in the Cupid's bow, it might be aligned with the nose perfectly straight up and down, but you have to remember that the mouth sits on a slight curve because of the teeth, and the structure of the skull kind of creates this rounding effect. So sometimes the center of the lips is just a slight curve from the center of the nose. And the reason, and it depends on the direction they're facing. If she was facing more this way, it would maybe curve this way. It's subtle, but it will help a lot with that feeling of three-dimensionality in the structure of the mouth. So I would just bring that up a little bit. This one is almost where it needs to be, but the right one of the Cupid's bow can move over a little bit. And where you have the bottom of the lip here, that little shadow, seems pretty good. You don't need to outline all of the lip. The only place I start to outline the entire lip is where I see it in definite shadow. But for transfer purposes, areas like here, we have this lost edge right here with the lip. You see a hint of it here and a hint of it here, and that's usually all I give myself. That way I'm not fighting this outline when I go into the painting stage, because it'll want to kind of strike through the paint a little bit, and you'll have to paint thicker and thicker to kind of get it to cover. So I always recommend just give yourself landmarks, but you don't need to outline the whole lip. The lips are a very soft form, and this is going to just disappear, and a lot of that will be kind of marked out by color difference. We're going to make the lips more pink, and this is going to be a cooler skin tone, so that's going to make that difference, but they're going to be pretty close to the same value. Okay, so here in the nose, I think this just needs to be a little bit wider. It looks like you have this in a good spot, but the left nostril does need to come over to about this wide. And then the same thing goes for the opening of the nostril here. Oops, wrong layer, hold on. There we go. So that's just a rough position. And you can see your shadow shape is here, where you have your line, but it needs to raise up just a little bit. I think where you have this nostril is pretty good, but you want to move this over to the left a little bit. And the same thing goes for making the cast shadow too long and low. It will make us want to push things down. So just watch that, and you have it starting and stopping in the right spot, but just shorten it up a little bit. So let's go into one of the important areas, which is the eyes. Overall, for the size of the face and where you have all of the other features positioned, the eyes are sitting just a tiny bit high. It's more noticeable here in this left eye. Your shape of the eye is really nice. I think you just need to drop it down just a little bit. Have the top of the line here be almost where you have the bottom of this one, kind of starting. In fact, I think some of what I was seeing was that where you have your line is actually where you see the lashes. And so when I place the white line, it's actually to mark where this underplane is. So it's not that you don't have the eyes roughly positioned, it's just that you're missing that underplane. And so what you have this line here at the top in the correct position, but you need to add that underline, which is going to drop the iris and the pupil down a little bit. And it's also going to drop this lower eyelid down a little bit. Make sure that this doesn't come up and pinch too quickly in the corner of the eye. Same thing with this eye here on the left. This should be that underplane that we see and then this needs to come down and open up a little bit so that you can drop the iris when you bring in that inner shelf. Okay, it's going to make a big difference in terms of the feeling of getting those realistic eyes to have that underside indicated. And last but not least, just a little bit narrower here in the neck. It could just be that the shadow from the hair comes in. It's really, really minor. All right, so really good job, and if you have any follow-up questions, just let me know. All right, Kelly. I don't know if you're in here, Kelly. If you are, hello and welcome. So let's pull up here. Now you also had the grid, so I was able to line up your grid really well. And I know some of you had trouble with the grid, and that's okay. If you don't like using a grid, that's no problem. I don't always use it. I use it occasionally. I find it sometimes interferes if I'm working too small, especially. It's almost too much information. But I do find it really useful the larger I work, especially because as we tend to paint larger and closer to life size, our sense of distortion in our painting can happen much more quickly because you don't often step back and you're standing so close to your painting. So anytime I'm painting larger than, 16 by 20, 18 by 24, but especially when I get up into 24 by 30, or 30 by 40, I definitely use a grid because it helps keep me positioned correctly for the portrait, especially in terms of composition, but it helps also maintain a sense of perspective so I don't get this distortion that happens when I'm up close to my painting and I'm drawing. So those of you who might have found this a little difficult at the small scale, you might find this really useful, the grid really useful as you work larger. All right, so a few suggestions. Most of it had to do with the features. I found that all of your proportions in the head and the placement of the hair and the face shape seemed really spot on. So just a few tweaks here in the portrait. So the biggest thing I noticed was that the eyes felt a little large, especially this eye here on the left. It's easy to over accentuate something like that, especially on a model that seems to have very large eyes. We tend to exaggerate kind of what we're pulled towards. And so, just to keep an eye on your proportions in those areas. Everybody has a tendency when they're drawing to make a certain error. I used to have a really big tendency to make things too wide, especially in figure drawing. So I really had to work on making sure I always checked my widths. It was just a habit that I wasn't aware of for a really long time. So everybody kind of has those, and a tendency to make large eyes, for example, might be one of your tendencies. So keeping an eye on those things and staying conscious of your habits as you're working can really help. So here in the left eye, I think this just needs to come up. You have your tear duct over here. It just needs to shorten a little bit. I realized this area was a little hard to read in the photo. It's not as clear, as you can see here. But this is kind of the outer edge of the tear duct because we're seeing this underplane in here, right? And this is the kind of tissue. So you just want to make sure that you have the correct width. So it's not getting too big here, and then you're not dropping this so low. And as a result of moving this up, you're going to be making your iris a little bit smaller. Okay, so just keep an eye on that area. And then here on the right, very similar. I think this part just needs to push up ever so slightly, and then make sure, I think you have your iris about that big, with the pupil being that big, and it's not quite that large. This is where actually the inner corner, this is where the two corners meet. Let me see actually. Yeah, so you have yours way over there, and it needs to be right in here. So just make sure you have a little bit of space between the corner where these corners come in for the white of the eye. It's in shadow, so I could see how that would be really tough to locate. You can always lighten your photo to help you see in that dark. It looks like your shadow edge for the nose is fine. I would open this up a little bit. I know this area where this connects, you could either leave it blank because the darkest shadow kind of dances this way, and then this picks up again with a different shadow, or you could connect it. That's just kind of a whatever makes the most sense to you. If you want to have this connected, you can as well. It is kind of a different value range right in that section, but I would definitely open this up if you're going to have that connection there. And then I would definitely bring up your cast shadow. It's really easy to over exaggerate how wide that gets, but one of the tricks is to drop a plumb line. I did post about this on someone's drawing earlier. If you take like a piece of thread and you just tie a button to the end, or a weight, a key, anything that'll just weigh down one end of the string, and you have your drawing up vertically on your canvas, on your easel, you can hold up the string against the paper and just let it fall vertical to the floor, right? And look for alignments like this. So you could look for where the edge of the cast shadow aligns with the eye. And if you look on the photo reference, this cast shadow lines up with the tear duct, the inner part here, kind of that fleshy part of the eyeball. So you want to make sure that yours is lining up there too. So those vertical lines can help in addition to the grid and keep us from exaggerating. You could also check horizontal lines. That was not horizontal. Horizontal lines for where the bottom, for example, bottom of the cast shadow, does it line up? Does it go down past the lips, or does it, stay higher? However, if your lips are in the wrong spot, then that's not going to help you. So I find those vertical alignments, everything goes back to the eyes. So that's why it's so important to establish the eyes early in the drawing and try and get them as correct as possible. Put all your focus in getting the eyes correct, and then you can position the nose and the mouth after, because they both relate back to the eyes. As a result of you dropping this down, I think you dropped the mouth down quite a bit, and what that did was it gave you not enough room down here, so it was making her chin and jaw look a little short. So all you need to do is bring that mouth up. The opening of the center of her mouth should be right where you have that Cupid's bow dip. So right where you have this part of the lip in your drawing now is actually where you have the opening of the mouth, where it should be. Okay, so make sure you bring that up, and then bring up this bottom cast shadow as well. Check vertical alignments for the corners of the mouth. I would make all your corrections to the eyes first before you go in and correct the nose and mouth. But moving that up, and then you're going to leave everything else the same, and it's going to really lock in her likeness. A few notes in the eyebrows, just make sure you don't go too wide, and then I would lift this one a little bit more. And I noticed some of you drew out kind of where her dark eyeshadow was, and I don't consider that part of the shadow mask. You might not want a hard line here. So what I would do is think about the structure of the brow, right? So we have this curving structure here. It becomes a hollow in here, and a little bit of a hollow out here. So those are the areas you're going to see shadow. You're going to see a shadow in here, and you're going to see more of a shadow here. You're going to get a little more light here in the center, this part, even though she has that dark eyeshadow on. So just it's a more of an artistic decision for you. Personally, I wouldn't want a hard outline here when I'm painting in the next stage, and it might help you to watch the next stage demonstration video before you do your transfer. just so that you can see how, we move into the underpainting and why you might not want lines. Some of you also had put lines out here for midtones, and really you want as simple of a drawing. First off, because it gives you less lines to transfer and less room for error, less room for confusion, but also you just really want the essentials so that you can move into painting, and then it becomes a tonal representation and not linear. So it's a little hard to jump, that gap between a line drawing and a tonal drawing, and that's why the most important markations that you want are just the shadow edge. You have shadow mass, light mass, shadow mass, light mass. We're looking for that pattern, so that way when we move in tonally, then we start describing the form with paint. But we don't want lines here marking out where a highlight is, because then it becomes like this topographic kind of map, and those lines will be hard to cover in the technique that we're using for our underpainting, which is using pretty much semi-transparent layers to build up the form. Anyhow, so, oh yeah, and down here in the arm, just watch that width there. I think it could be a little bit wider, which will help turn her body a little bit more. But otherwise, really nice work. All right. So, David, are you here, David? Were you able to tune in? All right, so let me bring up the photo reference here. So here's a good example. Now, David, you might have marked out some of these planes here for your own reference, and that's fine, but when you go in to transfer, I would just stick to your shadow edge for the transfer, your really dark lines. And you can keep these on your drawing for your reference later, but if you transfer all of these mid-tone lines, it's going to fight you a little bit when you get into the painting stage. So let me bring up some of the corrections here. So there's just a few. Again, it's all about locking in those eyes. They're the hardest part of the portrait, but it's really, really important to get them locked in, so that way everything else in the portrait kind of comes together. And they are the focus, especially in a head and shoulder portrait. The eyes are the primary focus, so it's really important to spend as much time as necessary to get them right. And they will change as you're painting. There's going to be some loss of the drawing as you paint. It just happens kind of naturally. But if you've drawn it once correctly, it's much easier for you to get it correct once you're painting. If you lose the drawing somehow, because you've done it correctly before, and you will always have your finished drawing on paper to refer back to. If you lose anything in your drawing, you always have your while you're painting, you're always going to have your original drawing to refer back to, which really, really helps, especially if you're just now learning to paint portraits in oil. When you get back into, painting, sometimes it's hard to control the drawing, and you might lose something, or get the proportions off or something, and then you still have this roadmap that you can measure off of and get back into your painting and correct them. So it's just a really helpful tip. Okay, so, and one of the reasons I teach it this way too. So here we go. All right, so on the left side, I would say the most important one here is this cheek. It's a little narrow, and so it's making this spacing here seem a little bit small. So I would suggest bringing that out about that far and dropping it down a little bit lower. And then where you have this line, I know it's hard to see, but again, it's about creating that symmetry. So let's drop this jawline down so that there's this symmetry here for that curvature. And if you need to lighten your photo reference on your computer and just to look at that deep shadow and see that markation here, then do whatever is necessary so that you can see it a little easier. I would just, for your own sake, you don't have to mark out everything in detail, but give yourself a rough line or position for the width of the nostril, somewhere in here. Even if you don't want to draw in the opening of the nostril for your transfer, I still recommend that you do, but if you want to wait until you're in the painting stage to place it, that's fine. But I would at least give yourself this mark. That way you have a easier gauge on where to position the opening of the nostril when you're in the painting stage. And then when it comes to the eyes here, the main one I want you to focus on is on that left eye. Your overall height is actually not too far off. Where you have this top line here, let me draw in a different color. Let's do red so you can see what I'm doing. So here we go. So where you have this top line here, almost lines up with where you have your line in your drawing underneath, as you can see, but you don't have that under shelf to the eye indicated, which is why your pupil and iris got pushed up. So if you actually go in there and with a second line and indicate this inner shelf and drop the tear duct here a little bit lower and open up the eye a little bit lower, bring down the pupil, you're going to lock in that eye. It's not a huge difference, but it's more about positioning the shape correctly. And same thing goes for this eye. Where you have this line in your drawing, you can see that there. Where you have that line is correct, but that's the eyelash line, and you need to indicate this under shelf here. So draw a second line and then drop your iris and drop the opening of the eye here a little bit more. So just get rid of this line here. And then you can just indicate, and I would actually get rid of this line down here and just have two thin lines right here. Remember that ribbon shape? I don't know if you saw it earlier, but the way the eye is, you have the tear duct here. We're only seeing a little bit of the shelf here, and then it kind of comes up and disappears towards this section. So it's almost like seeing a little bit of a ribbon, if that makes sense. Okay, so just try and get in there and be a little more specific in that eye. And then the only suggestion in the mouth is just to bring this center point up a tiny bit, and everything else in the lips is fine for transfer. All right, so everything else seems to be positioned pretty good. You might just make sure this eyebrow here on the left is a little bit more uniform and thinner. And those are my only other suggestions. And you can always post a follow-up drawing after you've made some of these adjustments in the forum, and I will give you my feedback if you'd like it. All right, good job. How's everyone hanging in there? All right, Linda, are you still with us, Linda? All right, good. You know, sometimes our critiques are going to go a little longer. That's why I gave us a time slot of 11 to 1:30 to 1, you know, but sometimes it's going to end a little sooner if I get through everyone quicker. But as we move forward in the class, they're going to probably get a little bit longer because I'll be doing a lot of these adjustments live. So I'll be doing paint overs over your work, especially when we get into color, because that's quite more involved. So just I know they're kind of long, so that's why I broke everyone up into two different groups. But today it looks like we'll probably be wrapping up here in the next 15 minutes. All right, so Linda, a beautiful drawing. So you had a couple of questions about just getting more of a likeness. I think that's what everyone had a question about. Just a few tweaks. So let's pull those up. So I would say the primary one, overall everything seems to be pretty well locked in. The only thing I would say is the most important adjustment is here along this jawline. This is where you have your line here coming in and meeting the neck, and it needs to push out to the left in order to give yourself enough space here and to also give a sense of that, again, that jawline rounding down. You actually have the jawline in the correct position over here. So just think of that symmetry, and it'll help. And you can even kind of look at how they kind of connect in a rounded kind of format, and that will help you find the position of it on the left side. And then the only thing I noticed here was this felt a little narrow. Again, finding some width in the cheekbone symmetry. I realize it's really hard to see within that shadow, so you might try lightening the photo in Photoshop just a little bit, enough to where you can see in that shadow. She has an ear in here too, you might want to indicate. So that would be my primary suggestion. It's probably more important than some of the minor, ones. It's going to give you plenty of space here in the mouth area and lower jaw. When it comes to this eye here on the left, the only thing I saw was that the brow sat a little low, so I thought to lift that just a little bit would help. And then here, here on the right side, same thing. She has quite a bit of space here, and I remember when I went in and made a few corrections in my drawing, that was something I had to play with a little bit to make sure I gave ample space here for the brow, especially on this brow, because she is lifting it with that expression in her eye, looking up in this direction. So it's not just such a static portrait, really. It's a little bit more dynamic. With the eye here, so your position is actually really, really good. The only thing I saw was that this looked a little wobbly, and it should be just a little more smooth and rounded where that eye is lifting in this section. So there should be this feeling of this lift here. So just smooth that out, that arc out a little bit here, and open that up right over the pupil, because that's the area that protrudes the most on the eye, and it's going to push that eyelid up a little bit. And then I think you could drop the tear duct just a little bit. It's perfect in its position in terms of width, but I think it just drops down a little bit, which will give you a little more of that exaggeration, that feeling of the eye looking up. We'll tend to see more of the shelf on that side as well, as the eye looks up. So that's something that's important to think about. And then when it comes down to the nose, I think this is in a good position. I think this nostril can just go up a little higher. And then I think the nose got a little narrow on this side. So what I would do is just drop a few plumb lines here and just check. It should line up close to the tear duct. And then this will need to raise up a little higher. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you more spacing. These stay where they are down here. So your base of like where you have the wings of the nostril and the philtrum starting here, that's in a good position. It's just that we needed a sense of more underside of the nose so that we reinforce that idea, that perspective that we're lower than her and looking up. If we were more eye level with her, we wouldn't see so much of this underplane here. And then with the lip, I think by raising some of that, you're going to actually have a little more feeling of space here. And then make sure that where this dip in the Cupid's bow comes down, that it sits a little bit more to the left of the center of the nose here. And that's going to give us that slight volume to the muzzle. The only thing with I think your overall position of the corner and on the left side is good. This part dips down a little exaggerated, her mouth, because we're looking up at her. A good visual is to imagine the muzzle like a sphere, right? And you have the corners of the mouth. And if you're looking at the model from a lower perspective, you're looking up at them, that center point is going to sit up like this. So imagine it like a line or a ribbon wrapping around that sphere. So everything's going to kind of relate on this. If we were above the model and looking down at her from above, you would have this kind of perspective, right? Not my best perspective drawing, but so it's just a great visual for when you're drawing the lips, to think about where your perspective is, and that's going to help make sure. And another thing that helps is to just look at this as like a horizontal line. That is not horizontal. Hold on. Well, maybe I can move that line. Nope. Nope. Hold on. Reset. Anyhow, you could draw basically a horizontal line and look at where the corners of the mouth sit compared to that middle center. That was the idea I was trying to illustrate. Okay. And then I think with this corner of the mouth, it drops maybe just a little lower than what you have. I think you have your line here. Let me see real quick. So bring that, yeah, so it just drops down a little bit lower. Yeah, I think overall where you have this bottom is pretty good. Don't feel like you have to outline everything. I usually just indicate this cast shadow and a little mark where I see the planes of the lip come out. And that is pretty much it. Do you have any questions, Linda? Oh, and down here in the arm, I can't tell if this is due to the photo being distorted, meaning the photograph of your drawing. If there's any distortion, it might have made this look a little bit off to me when I lined things up, but just double check. Again, you can use plumb lines. They're really, really handy. Like if you wanted to check where the armpit sits in comparison to the head, just drop a string down and see where it lines up. You'll see it lines up with the eye or whatever. You can't really do that out here because we don't have a frame of reference, but you could measure this width and take that measurement and compare it to the width of the face and just see what that looks like. Just to give yourself a little comparison. And I think this is a little more full, but again, this could just be distortion from the photo of your drawing. So just take a second look at those areas. And do you have any questions? Does anyone have any questions? We're at the end of this live stream, so if anyone has just general questions about some of the oh yeah, you're welcome. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type in the chat, and it can be about anything on the drawing. It could be something you're struggling with. Oh, you're welcome, Jennifer. Please join us again. Like I said, even if you're not a critique student and you're not getting your work critiqued, it's really helpful. I hope you found it helpful to watch, because sometimes seeing someone else's work get corrected, or you might see that someone else was struggling with the same thing you might be struggling with. It can be really, really useful. And for those of you who are having trouble with the image being very clear, this live stream will be available to rewatch. So it should be a clearer image. I'm not sure why it's coming up blurry for some of you. It could be an internet connection thing, but I'll look into it and see if I can get it a little more clear next time. The left eye placement. Are you right-handed, Kathy? Are you left-handed? Because sometimes, you know, if you're left-handed or right-handed, that can actually influence the way you're right-handed. Okay, yeah. So the left eye, if it's easier for you to place the right eye, I would always try to position that one first. And then you can use, the most important thing is to try and get the tilt between the eyes correct. Sometimes when I'm doing a head drawing and I'm not doing a grid, I don't remember if I uploaded the, I'll try, maybe I'll put something up, but basically when you're thinking about head construction, and not just using a grid to help you get things aligned, you want to draw like a center line going down the head, going from the chin to the middle of the forehead, on a slight curve if you're in like a slight perspective. And then whatever the tilt is for that vertical line, you can look at the tilt between the eyes, and it's usually perpendicular to that vertical line. So if the head's tilted and your line is somewhat diagonal for the vertical line on the face, it might be easier if I just drew it. Hold on. Let me just get rid of these. Okay, now let me just do a quick demo. Yeah, Tammy, I've never had the issue with YouTube. I've been doing this for 2 other classes, and they just changed the platform, and I'm wondering if maybe some of the settings that they kind of had pre-set up before what I was used to using, if they changed any of it. So I'm going to look into it, and hopefully it won't be an issue. But there's a couple of other platforms that are kind of like private, whiteboard or things like that. So I'm going to look into that, but hopefully I can just get this, because it's really nice for people to be able to go back to my YouTube channel and just watch it at their convenience. Okay, so getting back to your question, Kathy, about positioning the left eye. So you have, let's just say you have a head and there's a slight tilt. Okay, so I'm going to just draw like a generic oval, and let's say your tilt, the head's slightly tilted this way. The eyes are always going to be perpendicular, 90-degree angle to that tilt. Now, if you have a head tilted back, that relationship, you have to imagine the head kind of like an egg. That relationship is going to be on an arc if you're looking up at the model, like we are in our drawing. If you're looking down on the model from an above angle, like you're above their hair and you're kind of looking down, then that arc is going to curve this way, and it might be more extreme if you're really above them. So it's a matter of kind of practicing positioning the perspective and imagining the perspective on the head. But what I'll often do is, once I get that positioned, let's say I'm not doing a grid and I'm just trying to draw a generic head, I'll get the position for like the brow and the eyes, right? Then I'll draw the position of, I won't draw the actual eye in an outline, but I will draw the position of the height and the widest points of the eye, almost like creating a little box. And then I measure the distance between the eyes and do the same thing here, making sure that these are parallel. Does that make sense? So then once I've gotten the eye to that stage, then I will start to draw the detail of the eye. And then I will copy that over here, making sure I keep my overall measurements in mind. And if you're having trouble with this, another just solution is to flip your drawing upside down and try drawing upside down. You, of course, have to turn your reference upside down, and you can't do this if you have a live model, but it does help give you a little bit of a fresh perspective, and you can work on the eye while it's upside down, and then flip it back over and take another look at it and see if you got it corrected. So that would be my suggestion, and you could have done that on something like what we have here. So let me choose white. So here we have this center line, right? And there's a slight curve to it because her head's tilted up and back and a little bit to the left. And then we have this. And when I'm looking at the eye alignment, I use the tear ducts because they're just an easy point to find. So that's what I usually use for my eye line, right? And then I will find my top and bottom, inner and outer points using comparative measurement. And then I go in and draw my angles. And then I start to refine that. I do the same thing for the nose, for example, and maybe to find these points, I would do the same for the mouth. But when I position the line for the mouth, I would just stick to what's in the middle and then find that these points are below that, for example. But yeah, that would be my suggestion. Start with the eye that you feel is your strength, so that would be the right eye, but focus on alignment first. I did go over that in my head drawing class. We went into some head construction a little bit more, and it's a tougher kind of method to get used to, but it's really valuable for situations where you might be using a grid, but you're still struggling to get that eye positioned, and then you can kind of switch gears and place in, your estimated tilts, and then you can see, oh, maybe my eye is positioned too high on the left side. You can also use straight lines. It kind of throws you off a little bit, but if you did a straight line here and a straight line here, let's see if I can get these parallel. These are kind of thick lines, but you can see that this eye sits slightly, very slightly above this eye. So what that's telling us is that the tilt to the head is slightly down. And estimating tilts is probably one of the hardest parts of portrait drawing. And so what I like to do is try to find that that center line, and I always aim for the middle here and then the middle chin. Ignore the nose and the mouth because it comes off of that main plane for the face, but when you're finding your tilt line, look for those 3 points. And that's going to give you, that's easier to see than trying to estimate this tilt. And then all you have to know is that this should be perpendicular for the most part to this line here. Does that make sense? Sorry, that was a pretty long explanation. Does anyone else have questions? All right, so again, thank you for bearing with me during the technical difficulties this morning. That shouldn't happen again. I'm going to try and work through some of those glitches, and I need to do a little research into the way YouTube set up the new platform. I will let everyone know if it's the case where I need to send a new link every week. I hope that's not the case because it hasn't been how it has been in the past. But I will let everyone know by posting in the forum. And if you guys have any follow-up questions after this that pop into your head, also feel free to tune in at 2:30 is when we start the Group B. If you guys just want to tag along and watch, feel free to tune in, or you can come to my YouTube channel anytime and you can watch the videos at your convenience. The new lessons are up, so you guys can go over there and watch the demo, and there is one more coming. I should have it up by tomorrow. It's just a little bonus lecture talking a little bit about finding value structure and kind of the abstraction. It'll be very similar to this live stream. It's going to be on the iPad, and it's just a little bonus video, but the main demonstration on the painting is already up and ready to watch. So I hope you guys enjoy the new week, the new week's lesson, and if you guys have questions about those new videos, again, just post in the forum, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'm on there pretty much every day, so I've been keeping up, I hope, pretty well with everyone. All right, so no more questions. Thank you everyone for tuning in. If this was blurry, again, come back to the channel in about an hour. It should be posted, and you'll see it in my channel. And the link to my YouTube channel is in that critiques outline download. Okay? All right, thanks guys. I'll see you next week. Bye.